Good morning. Today I'm joined by my guest, Mr. Richard Durant. How are you doing, Rich?
Good morning, David. This is very surreal, being the other side of the camera to you.
Well, I was going to say it's an absolute sincere pleasure to be interviewing you today, almost, not as your colleague anymore, but as somebody on the other side of it. So I'm not here to blow smoke. I'm incredibly biased. You and I worked together for long enough to know each other really well. But many people will sort of know you from the decade that you spent steering the ship at Intercounty and LSLI when they were going through sort of massive growth stages. And, you were then involved in private equity. You've been involved with Kerfuffle, and then latterly MD of the Relocation Agent Network. And you've seen overseas sort of that acquisition and getting it stabilized, and it's a very well-known brand. I know you're going to hate me doing this, but I've done it anyway. I've dug around on the internet to see what people are saying about you behind your back. It's election season, and people are going through politicians' tweets. So I've decided that's what I was going to do.
I presume this is business comments, not personal comments.
These are business comments. I've left out the ones that your mum has made about you. But it's interesting just to sort of get a flavour for what people are saying about you. And I'll read some of them, and you can just sit there and blush a little bit. But Christian Bolshan, who everybody will know, is Rightmove head of lettings, was previously at Van Milde, a very well-known name, both in rugby and also in property, as it turns out. Richard has taught me a huge amount about how great estate and letting agents work and how to think about building products that work. I know some fantastically talented people in our industry, and Richard leads the pack in intelligent insight and effective practice. Now that's high praise from a man that doesn't necessarily dish out high praise to everybody. If you know Christian, as many agents will do, he says it like it is. So he's really not one to dress it up. Stay right there, Rich. You will get a chance to respond. I'm going to go a little bit further. Another one. This is from Francis Jago, and he's CEO of Jago Partners. He said, "I worked with Richard for 18 months developing business strategy and activation for a PE-funded project in residential property marketplace. Richard has a strong ability to bring ideas to the table that are both insightful and deliverable, allowing his team to work collaboratively to deliver KPIs that reflected the business's long-term growth ambitions. Richard also made working together, often in stressful situations, quite enjoyable." Now, I have to sort of endorse that last bit of the comment, because I think that's what you and I managed to achieve together over a long period. But this sort of stuff goes on, and there's another couple as well. And obviously, you've got obvious endorsements from other well-known characters such as Simon Whale, Tim Drayson, ex-global head of corporate sales at BNP Paribas. So we're talking some big names. We're not, these aren't reviews that have been left by your mum and your closest family members. After sort of so long working in the industry, how does it feel to sort of hear some of that or read some of that?
It's obviously very nice. What you probably don't know is I had a similar technique to I don't know if you remember the Purple Bricks in their prime.
Heard of them?
They when they were growing, they had a very good strategy, which was request reviews at the most satisfied point in the consumer journey, which was offer accepted. Every single one of those comments was written when I had something each of those people needed. So I'll continue to dine out on them for years to come. But look, I think with any of them, and we forged good relationships over time, and I would have positive things to say about all of those people. But yes, very nice to hear.
It must be lovely to hear. I know that your new venture is not something that is prevalent really in our industry, but it's a word, if you like, that is becoming more prevalent throughout business in general. And that word is fractional. What I'd like to know is, what is a fractional lettings director? And why have you chosen to go down this route rather than sort of accept? I mean, I know you've been inundated with offers from various different people. Why would you choose to do that rather than step back into a bigger venture?
If we start with a why first, because the why is obviously always a driver. And I appreciate everything I say. I have a massive letting bias, so my background's lettings. But I think as an industry with a bias towards sales, and I think that's caused mainly because most agents are run by estate agents rather than letting agents. And I understand the reason behind that. The personality types tend to be very different. Letting staff tend to be more sort of cautious, process driven, where salespeople are all sort of more flamboyant and risk takers. Commercially, sales generates the cash flow required to become profitable quickly. So I understand the reasons why estate agents are predominantly owned by estate agent rather than letting agents. But in my opinion, some of even the very best agents around don't pay the same attention to lettings as they do sales. And I think it's obvious, if I ask various business owners, and some of these run the best estate agency groups in the country, about their business, conversion rates, average fees, who their biggest competitors are, revenue per transaction, etc., etc. Without hesitation, they'll all be able to proudly reel off the sales stats. You ask them the letting stats, they rarely know them, and certainly not to the degree they do sales, because people gravitate to what they know best.
Do you think there's also? Do you think there's also? I'll just interrupt you there, but do you think there's also sort of a simplicity sometimes to the sales process versus the technicalities of the lettings process that sometimes make us concentrate too much on the bigger on that as the big money rather than where we know the value is, which is lettings?
Yeah, I think, as I said, we gravitate to what we know. So I think that if my background's estate agency and I've been a fantastic estate agent and I've gone off, grown my business, how can I impact the bottom line the best? How can I motivate my team? I know sales. I'm really good at sales. I'm going to instill that sort of knowledge I have in my staff. And naturally, my sales business grows, the revenue's coming in. I suppose the frustration for me is we know that the managed portfolio creates a majority of value in our business at the point of exit. I don't think anybody denies that.
Yeah.
We also know, and what we've seen sort of recently, sort of 4 years ago, lockdown as an example, property management generates that recurring revenue, which is often the difference between success and failure. I imagine there was some very awkward conversations going on in March 2020 where people ran sales only businesses or sales businesses with huge overheads with minimal lettings revenue.
Yeah.
Yet we still focus on sales. If you examine the estate agents who fetch mouth-watering multiples, you looked at your Romans and your Marsh and Parsons and so on, and there'd be a load more. The one common denominator is that they all boasted exceptional lettings businesses, which create that recurring revenue that buyers, investors want. And I suppose the other frustration for me is when I look at our industry, and it will be the last point of my rant about why agents should be concentrating on lettings, is when agents focus on lettings growth, ordinarily it's by way of acquisition.
Yeah.
And to caveat that acquisition should be part of anybody's strategy. But if you look at the numbers, if I've got a property at £1,300 a month rent with 12% management fee, my annual revenue is 1,800, 1,900 quid. The value of a lettings book is derived from a number of variables, so there's no one number. And you should speak to somebody like Ian White, Peter Fuller, Luton Noonan to find out more. But in the most basic sense, lettings books are currently trading at 1.8 times management revenue, meaning my cost of acquisition is £3,500 on a landlord you have no relationship with and hasn't chosen you.
Yeah.
Yet very few businesses will spend anywhere near that amount to source a new landlord organically.
That is super interesting, actually. I think you're right. I think sometimes as agents, it's far easier to sort of go get a loan, finance it, do your due diligence and all that sort of stuff, and acquire another estate agent in order to grow that portfolio of lettings, managed lettings stuff that you've got. You're also, though, inheriting a bunch of clients that, for the most part, as you've said, don't know you. They've got no real history with your brand. And and you may also be inheriting all manner of bad habits, and all the other stuff that comes along with that.
Absolutely, but unless you're moving to a new area, hence an acquisition. If you are acquiring a local lettings book, those landlords didn't choose you, because if you're a prominent business in that town, they will have known you, yet they chose a competitor. And actually, quite often is the case, which is you'll probably have some previous landlords in there for whichever reason left your business.
Yeah.
Look, and you'll work into your metrics of redemption rate. And as I said to you, everybody should look at that acquisition. But I also believe and get frustrated that agents, when they're looking at their lettings business compared to their sales business, their cost of acquisition, and by cost of acquisition, what are they spending on tech? I think if you looked at most estate agencies and you went, right, what we're spending on staff, what we're spending on training, what we're spending on tech, what we're spending on marketing, what does our marketing look like, who are we talking to, and appreciate, I'm going back a little bit now, but even just the window displays, what's a mix between sales properties and lettings properties in your window? I just think everybody has this real bias towards sales. I understand it, because people like to stick in their comfort zone and where they can be most effective.
Yeah, no, I get that. That all makes complete sense. But that's the sort of the why. Going back to the what is a fractional lettings director, and how would that work typically?
Essentially, fractional, another word for part-time. So it's a part-time lettings director, meaning that for those companies that maybe they don't warrant a lettings director, and I think a lot of the time it's a lettings director of a certain pedigree, and I'm certainly not saying I'm a certain pedigree, but a lettings director of a certain pedigree will have as a minimum a six-figure, it will have a six-figure salary attached to it.
Yeah.
And a large part of their roles will be, recruitment, marketing, HR to run that lettings division. So if you've got a business where the business owner, the MD, can handle many of the tasks such as recruitment, marketing, HR, they don't warrant a lettings director. So essentially, a fractional lettings director is somebody who can go in, drive the business forward, especially on organic growth, increase the value of the asset without the burden of that high salary.
So that does make sense, and I suppose it offers businesses who are looking to grow but perhaps don't have a lump sum to sort of invest and oversee that recruitment and the bedding in of that person. You can import, if you like, the skill set of somebody that has done this consistently elsewhere and slot it into the business as a sort of task force to stimulate growth. But you've talked about revenue increase, you've talked about organic growth. In my experience, it's a lot easier said than done. So without giving everything away, or even anything away, how easy is it?
Look, it's not easy, and it's never an overnight fix, but I think it's a lot easier than people believe. And I think you require focus and persistency to do it. That personally, I think there's three main things that any business owner of a lettings business want. And whilst I agree that a great culture is important and being compliant is non-negotiable, what each business really wants is three things: more landlords, more revenue per landlord, and greater efficiencies. So you talk about how do we do it? That we look at each part of a business and we break down all of the core elements and make slight improvements to start with. And we might start with the low-hanging fruit. So more revenue per landlord. You've already attracted the landlord. So how do you increase that revenue per landlord? So, as an example, if you're managing 500 units, at a complete guess, I would imagine 70% of them have a mortgage. Likely to be on a 2-year fixed rate, meaning that every year you'll have 175 landlords remortgaging their properties. By the way, the property they've trusted you to manage and advise them on. So let's say your referral fee is £500 per case. That's £90,000 of revenue a year.
Yeah.
Just by putting into your process, and process is a key word, to talk about financial services. So that's one small element. You've then got rent protection policies, landlord insurance, zero deposit. The list is endless on what you could do. And you looked at sort of financial services as a whole, and I think in sales, we're very, very good at it. And I think as an industry, we've gone, right, we've got a sales business. How can we add additional revenue sources? So let's do mortgages and let's do conveyancing. And in lettings, we're very, very poor at it. So, could your staff be having a conversation along the lines of at offer placed? David, I know the landlord really well on this property, lovely family, but the first question they always ask me at offer stage is, should the tenant lose their income due to unemployment, illness, or anything like that, what means do they have to continue paying the rent? So just can I ask you, what savings do you have, Mrs. Tenant? And the likelihood is you might have some savings, but often you won't. And then there's a conversation which says, you insure your phone, you insure your pet, you insure your car, but you don't insure your life, when sometimes it's as little as 20 quid a month. Would you like me to get somebody to give you a call? Again, it will be scripted far better than that. But I don't know if you remember sort of 25 years ago, when you took a mortgage, you had to take life and critical illness. It wasn't an option.
Yeah.
Interestingly, when you get a mortgage, should something happen, you're more likely to be able to get a payment holiday or be able to refinance to some structure. In a tenancy, you are bound by a legal contract. And some landlords, there'll be some really nice landlords, but lots of landlords just won't remove you. So our agents looking at the opportunity, is it a right advice for tenant? I think it is in most cases.
Yeah, it's really sound life advice, isn't it?
Does it generate additional revenue for letting agents? Absolutely.
That makes perfect sense, and that sort of takes that human element of the lettings transaction, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think going back to more revenue per landlord, more revenues. I think agents are guilty of having sort of one size fits all approach to the marketing valuations. Yet, in my opinion, you have three distinct landlord types. So you'll have what I would call an accidental landlord. And what I mean by that is they're renting out a property that they've once lived in.
Yeah.
You've then got your buy-to-let landlord. So that's often a local homeowner who decides that they're going to create a pension fund or from properties, they've got a buy-to-let mortgage. And then you've got portfolio landlords. And the wants and needs for all three types of those landlords are very, very different. If you take an accidental landlord, there's an emotional attachment to the property. You take a portfolio landlord, they don't even know the addresses if the portfolio is of a certain size.
Yeah.
So the wants and needs will be very different. A accidental landlord will prioritize a right tenant who's going to take care of the property. They probably know the neighbours, the kids might still be at similar schools, rather than agreeing it to let it to the first tenant who walked through the door. Their interests are about how you're going to manage your property, and therefore what products you have in that kit bag, which may be of interest to that landlord: rent protection, landlord's building insurance, essentially anything that will add comfort and reassurance to somebody who's likely to be nervous. Whereas a buy-to-let landlord will care more about rent arrears, void periods, speed of let, in order to minimise their risk. Yet, I believe most agents are guilty of talking to every type of landlord in exactly the same way, trying to sell a product which might not be suitable for that particular landlord.
It's about sort of taking that time to understand the landlord's needs and treating each one of them as an individual customer rather than one sort of homogenized whole, because you're right, every customer is different and every customer has a different, I suppose, a trigger, a soft point that they need protection on.
Yeah, and I think as a minimum, it's about training the staff to the pitch. So if I come around to your house where your children were born and raised and nurtured, and I come round and I talk to you about how we're going to look after your property, what a routine inspection is, what we look for. Prevention's better than cure. This is where we're going to manage it. This is the input you're going to need. This is what we're going to do. I'm going to put you at ease. If I just come around and talk about how quickly I'm going to let this to whoever's going to pay you the right money, I imagine that you're going to choose the agent who's really took time to understand you. And I think letting agents, just our tone of voice is only ever directed at one personality persona. And so we talk about the three things. We talk about more landlords, more revenue per landlords, and greater efficiencies. We'll look at the low hanging fruit. We'll look at more revenue per landlord. And then more revenue per landlords and more landlords is, let's just look at the process. Let's look at the quick wins to start the process off.
Well, that all makes perfect sense, and there's lots of nuggets in there for people to be able to take away and think about, some of which, you know, I suppose my old business used to do quite well in certain parts, but also they're all things that sometimes we forget. I mean, we knew them at one point, especially when you're at that sort of early stage of a business and you're growing it, you have the time to sit down with each landlord and customer and really get to know them. In fact, if you were to tell me now, out of all the landlords that I've ever dealt with, and we're talking hundreds over the years, who do I remember the best? I could tell you my first 10. I could tell you each position they were in when they came to me. I could tell you where the properties were managed, why they entered the market as a landlord. And it's because at that time I did have the time to sit and listen. And at some point you lose your head with it, and you forget that this is a people business at its core, and that you need to get into your processes. And I suppose that's the key. You need to work it into your business's ethos and its culture, that it's worth investing that time in those customers.
And I think there's 2 points. So you've mentioned time, and we'll go back to that investing time into your customers. But time is a key, which is, as your business grows, you get less and less time. The key to growing that lettings business is all around that you're not going to, every landlord on the market today whose property isn't on the market has a tenant in situ, and the likelihood is that tenant is going to be in situ for probably the next 18 months. I think Rightmove believe it's somewhere nearer 3 years. But it's going to be sort of at least 18 months. So if you're starting this today, it's all around small incremental gains. And there's a saying, and it's not one of mine, but people do what you inspect rather than what you expect. So are the business owners having the time to look at every single minute detail in their lettings business to look at those incremental improvements?
So going back to these businesses, then, if I've had my agency for any sort of number of years, and let's face it, because we know with acquisitions these days that the value of the business very much is tied to the value of the lettings book. I know when you speak to an agent who has sales and lettings going on in a business, they feel a bit guilty that they've never really sort of managed to deliver significant growth on the lettings. It's grown perhaps organically, ones and twos and threes here and there, but they never really felt like it had that boost that it needed. So how do I, and part of that is that this silly hesitancy sometimes to invest in that process, because it does cost money. But how do I then grow my business without having to fork out hundreds and thousands to acquire somebody else's lettings book?
There's lots of ways of doing it, but you know, in that scenario, if you've been trading in your town for 15 years, you're likely to have a lot of the answers already, and data is the king. What I believe is, if you walk into lots of businesses today and said to a member of a sales lister, what's your next 5 instructions, they'll be able to tell you very, very quickly. If you say that same thing to a lettings lister, they might struggle slightly. So I think I would break it down into 2 sections: data you have within the business and data outside of a business. So if you looked at data outside of a business, you know, as one example, could you create a process so you have this conversation with every applicant you register who currently lives in rented accommodation in the area you trade? So, you know, as a letting agent, you're registering more and more people for every property which comes on the market. And a handful of those will already be in rented accommodation in your trading area. So, you know, you phone up to register a property, you can have a conversation which says, David, as I'm sure you'd have witnessed, the demand for property is exceptionally high. We're seeing multiple people interested in each listing. Can I ask you a question? Does your current landlord know you're looking to move? Because if so, if I was able to contact them and take a personal reference for you, it would really strengthen your position with my landlords. And guess what? You're going to be one of the first people I call every time a property comes available to arrange a viewing, because I know the likelihood is you're going to pass referencing because your landlord's told me good things. Look, you may not, what you won't understand is the reasons I want that information as a tenant. You may believe that your landlord is the letting agent because that's who's on your tenancy. You may not know it, but a good chunk of people will know it and selfishly will give that information across. And they might speak to the landlord and say, can you do me a favour? But ultimately, I've now got the name and a telephone number of a local landlord who's likely to have a property coming available
in
the near future.
You absolutely know it, yeah.
And more so, you know, could I give them a call and say, Mr. or Mrs. Landlord, the market's really strong. We go over and above what normal agents do. Yes, we go through the official referencing process where, you know, we'll take a bank reference and a credit reference, etc. But we believe that it's more than that. It's about the individuals. Can I just ask you some questions about David, your tenant?
Yeah.
And you can make it a very, very engaging conversation. So you've now not only got the details of a local landlord who's likely to have a property coming available, but you've demonstrated that you go over and above and you're better than most of the other agents about the care you put into deciding who's the right tenant for them.
And if they had an agent that was doing that for them on their side of things, they would love it. And it's a beautiful win-win scenario, because you are actually at its core, you are going above and beyond. You are checking a personal reference for the prospective tenant, but you're also identifying an opportunity. They may choose to let the property, but they may turn around to you equally and say, thanks for calling, Richard. Yeah, we know the tenant's leaving. We intend to sell it. That's an opportunity for your sales department right there, isn't it?
Absolutely. But absolutely. What you need to do, in my opinion, is you then create a database. So in sales, most agents will pay the most attention to not on market, local house to sell.
Yeah.
Because that's where their business is coming from. If you can create a database where all of your properties, which are rented in your area, are in one place, you can form a process which allows you to have various different conversations. But if you go back to, you know, you said how easy is it? That's one scenario. You know, how many agents have looked at their sales pipeline today and gone, let's look at all of the buyers. How many of those buyers are in rented accommodation? The chances are I've built a good rapport because we've gone through that whole down valuation point of their survey, and I've educated them on a sales process, and we've built a relationship up. The likelihood of asking them for a recommendation at that moment in time is very, very high. But our agents doing it, you know, are they looking at sales viewings? What are you doing with the reference information your provider's collecting? So, you know, whoever that provider may be are collecting an awful lot of data, which often will include the landlord's data to undertake a landlord reference. Yet I think agents are guilty of sending the tenant a link. The tenant fills in all of that information, including the landlord information, goes back to the referencing, and the letting agent are sat there high-fiving when that reference comes back as a pass, rather than going, what else could we get from it?
It's about then, I suppose, putting that into those processes, rather than the sort of the end of the process being congratulations, we've passed a reference there. We've got a couple more steps still to go, right?
Yeah, and I think going back one step to creating that database, if I came up to you in the pub on Friday night and said, I've got a list of every single property which is let in your town, financially, you would give me some money for that list.
Yeah.
Yet putting aside where we have agents, landlords' details, how much information are we collecting every single month to help grow that portfolio? So we talk about data in, data outside of information. In every town, there'll be a set amount of properties coming onto the market. Are we using Rightmove and looking at our property, and are we logging it? And then are we logging every change? So as a minimum, I've now tracked David's property for the last 4 years. If David ever approached me or I ever have that conversation, I'm able to say, oh, number 17, I know that property. Didn't you have it on the market in 2022 with XYZ for £1,000? And then 2023, it went back on the market for £1,200. That's going to be a really good starting conversation. And that landlord's going to go, no, you're really knowledgeable. So they should be collecting all of that information. What they should also be doing is cross-referencing all of those properties with their sales, their financial services, with their CRMs, because they will have an awful lot of that data. So the more data you accumulate, the more effective your goals can be. So I've now got data. I've spoken to David's landlord, or David is the landlord. I've taken a personal reference, and David's landlord has gone onto the market with another agency. I've now taken to the market a property in a similar location, similar type of property. Agents should be, in my opinion, going through their database of potential landlords, looking at agents who have got a similar property to one I'm just about to take on the market, and have a conversation which says, hi David, Richard here from XYZ Estates. Good news for you. Understand you owe number 7 Acacia Avenue. Tenants are currently paying 800 quid a month. Here's the good news. I've just listed number 18, similar floor plans to yours, and we're going to put it on the market at £900 a month. Would you be interested in knowing what price it achieves, at which point your agent can use it, or you can use it as leverage at the point of renewal to get you the best possible price? Very few landlords are going to say, no, I don't want to know, because it's of interest to them.
Yeah.
So because we hadn't asked for anything, the information benefits them, very few decline. And then you can have the following call, which says, David, Richard here. We spoke a couple of weeks ago about 18 Acacia Avenue. You asked me to let you know what it achieved. We booked 11 viewings. 9 turned up. From those 9, we got 3 offers. After carefully assessing each applicant's background and position, we agreed to let it to a delightful couple at 950. Hopefully, this information provides you with some leverage when negotiating an increase at the point of renewal. Would you like me to send you the details via email? Oh, out of curiosity, when are you up for renewal?
Yeah.
If David now tells me his renewal is November, I can build my process, and I can now have a meaningful conversation with somebody who's likely to be having a property coming available.
It's brilliant, that.
So in answer to your question, what do we do? How do we do it? How easy is it? Firstly, is it easy? If anybody believes that they're going to go and create a database and win 20 new instructions tomorrow, it's not going to happen.
It takes time and it takes effort, doesn't it?
It takes time and it takes effort. In a previous business, 70% of instructions came from the potential landlord database. So we just collected all of this data. We nurtured it. We had meaningful conversations at the right times. So should agents be looking at the lettings journey and looking at where a landlord may have various different pain points and putting in a well-timed call at those various moments? But it took 17 months. So the average time from adding a landlord onto the database or a property onto the database to banking the first check is what we called it. The average period of time was 17 months. But like I said, 70% of instructions came from data we just collected just by doing our jobs.
It's fascinating. Now I'm going to do my Graham Norton impression and say, so you've got a book out, Reg, but you've got an ebook in which a lot of this juicy information is there, and your tips. It's an absolutely fantastic, to my mind, it's a fantastic reminder of some of the things that we wished we paid attention to, and we know that it's common sense that we should do it, but we sometimes just need that constant push, that structure. We need to work it into our processes, and you've got the benefit of having done that at some major outfits. You understand the needs of, from what I can see from the sort of people that you've been helping and working with, particularly in RAN and you know the other agents that we've helped at Kerfuffle. You know the needs of sort of independent agencies as well as corporates. So I think you've worked with all manner of businesses. You understand how landlords think, and you understand that there's more than one type of landlord, which I think is also superb. So people can get hold of your book and read that. There's loads of value in there, and if you do anything next and you don't wish to sort of invest in any kind of fractional lettings director, I think you'd be a fool. But if you didn't, read that book, implement it yourself. Fantastic stuff in there that you can go away and start to put at work in your business in itself. But talk to me about, if there were people out there that needed your help to grow, talk to me about a sort of a client avatar, a sort of a what makes an ideal client. Who would you be looking to help first?
Look, I think everybody, but I think the reality is who's going to get the most benefit out of me. I think that if you're looking at businesses which have probably been trading a decade plus or have gathered a lot of data, and have probably got under 700 properties under management, and I think that sort of 700-800 properties is the point most people get a lettings director in. I also think that there's a difference between different types of lettings directors. So my experience and in my old business, there's two things which are very different. Is you've either got somebody who's very, very good at compliance, which is absolutely essential. And I think lettings directors tend to be managing the book to make sure everything is compliant and the business owner stays out of prison. And that's absolutely required. But has your business got a lettings director who's absolutely driving the result? And therefore, can we work alongside them? The businesses of around 500, 600, 700, maybe 800 properties don't tend to have a lettings director at all.
Yeah.
But we'll have some seniority in terms of, you know, lettings branch managers or lettings managers, and we'll work with them. And then what we do is we'll go and spend some time doing a deep dive, and then we'll create a structure and a plan. And it might be, and everybody has a different requirement and a different need. So if I look at some of the clients without naming them, I've got a business that says we do one-to-ones, we do end of month reviews, we analyze our figures, and their terminology, not mine, is it's a little bit like me looking at a car. I can lift the bonnet, I can kick the tires, but actually I can't tell you whether the car's going to break down in a month, and I certainly can't tell you how to increase its performance. And therefore I can sit in a review with one of my managers and they can say whatever they want, and I'll have to take their word for it because I don't really know the telltale signs of what they're doing and if it's genuine. It might be that we go in once a week, but ultimately every business has a different need. Ultimately it's that lettings director. So if there's an issue, who can my staff pick up the phone to get the answer? Who's driving the business forward? Who's looking at the overall strategy? But I think the key point, David, is a lot of it is around driving and growing that businesses.
So you're not there. You're not after anybody's job. You're not a threat to anybody that has seniority within lettings, and they should actually see you as a conduit, as a way to sort of getting to a higher level of growth that will enhance their position in the long run. And it doesn't need to be forever, does it?
It doesn't need to be forever. I'm not after anybody's jobs. I've got one client who has earmarked who's going to be their lettings director. They're currently on the tools, so they're still out there.
Yeah.
And that person is involved in every single meeting, and I work really, really closely with that person. So that person, for all intents and purposes, the staff in that business believe that all of a sudden their lettings business is being driven and driven and driven by said person. What's actually happened is that person is not doing what I tell them, but I'm assisting them, but they are the voice of the business.
Yeah.
And we've done a 2-year contract, and they believe that in 2 years' time, that person will then become their lettings director and is in a position where they can continue to grow that business. Similarly, I've got another business where the owner of a business has said, I want to exit in the next 5 years. I know what value I've got in my head. Tell me what I need to do to achieve the value I want, and come and drive that lettings business forward. So it's very, very varied. But essentially, think of it as having a lettings director in your business, albeit that might be 1 day a week, 4 days, 3 days a month, whatever it may be.
And I can vouch for him. He can be trusted. He's easy to work with. He's got a sense of humor. With a haircut like that, you'd need to. You're an absolute pleasure to work with, and you are an absolute mind of knowledge when it comes to lettings and how to grow the businesses organically without massive need for sort of investment and acquisition, which is, it's messy, it's stressful as well to sort of bed in those things, but you can help with that as well. So anybody looking to get in touch, you could do a lot worse than have a chat with Richard. We will put you in touch with him. Rich, thank you very much for your time.